Hi, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm the Artistic Director of the Alcove New Play Development Program at the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City. That's a lot of words. I am also a playwright, and it's my pleasure today to welcome three amazing playwrights. Also, some of them are performers, so this is going to be interesting to talk about as well, to a conversation series. If you haven't been to the series before, it's a series that looks at playwriting, theater of the world, not necessarily in that order. Elements of craft factor into the conversation, and sometimes business things, industry things that come up. They intersect with the world. We can't pretend we're not in the world. I'm going to start with an audio description of myself. I'm a fair-skinned person with brown eyes. My hair is pulled up today. It's sort of goldish, auburnish brown. And I have fluffy bangs. They're on my forehead. I'm wearing sort of cat-eye glasses on the tip of my nose. I have red lipstick on and stringy blue headphones. And I have a top. You may not see all of it, but you might see peaks of it. So it's red. It's vibrant red. And if you might catch, if you can, there's leaves on it. Leaves, vibrant red, leaves, pattern. And then you might see zebras at some point. So the shirt has zebras and leaves kind of dancing on this kind of red landscape. Behind me is a white background. Occasionally you might see the outline of a photo frame that's behind me. That's my audio description. More importantly, our guest today, Exal Iraheta, beaming in from Chicago. Am I getting that right, Exal?
Yes.
Yay. Mónica Sànchez, beaming in from Albuquerque or somewhere else?
Exactly.
Albuquerque. And Iraisa Ann Reily, beaming in from New York or New Jersey? Which one is it today?
Today it's New Jersey. It's usually New York, but
today it's New Jersey. All good. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to just say a little bit about each of their works. And then, of course, if they want to amplify about who they are and what they do, we'll get into that. Exal's work is magical, mysterious, devoted to I think I say this in a good way, to the strange, and wanting to bust boundaries, and specifically looking at queer voices in theater and Latine voices of different, how shall I put this? Voices that aren't usually seen on our Latin stages. I'll say that. And we'll get into that. Mónica Sànchez is a performer, an actor, many years of experience, vibrant career, also a wonderful playwright, poet, and educator. And I've had the honor to publish their work with No Passport Press, which is a press that I run separate from the Lortel. And just a big fan, have always been, and delighted that they're here today to talk about their writing. Iraisa Ann Reily is a wonderful performer playwright working for us. I should say that all of these three artists are commissioned by us in varying years. The years are very fast here at the Lortel. Iraisa is working on a play called Enero Seis, which is a solo piece, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But they don't only write solo material, they also write plays with multi-characters, just coming off of a stint at the Two River Festival. Crossing Boundaries, Crossing Borders, what is the name of it?
Crossing Borders.
Crossing Borders Festival. I just want to get it right. Very cool. Thanks for being here and welcome. If you have been here before, you know I always start with the same question, which has to do with the climate crisis. How, as artists, is the crisis affecting your practice, your way of thinking about theater, your way of relating to audiences, and the world? Very big question, I know, and anyone who wants to dive in first can do so.
Bueno, I'll jump in. I'll jump in the drought-ridden waters. I guess for me, it's, we can't escape it, whether consciously or unconsciously. I know I've been posted at Colorado College for the last 5 years, and 3 years ago, I directed the fall production. and I went into the Climate Change Action Theater resource, which is an incredible resource, and curated seven short plays for our fall production. We called it 2359, referring to the Carl Sagan's cosmic calendar, where if human beings appeared after 14 million years, we end up at the last second of 1159, New Year's Eve, right? Give perspective as to how long the planet has been in existence and how short a time we've put it in peril and jeopardy. And we had a mandate for this production that the entire set was made out of recycled and found materials, likewise with the costumes. And it was, kind of a wake-up call as to see how challenging that was and how important that was. Most recently, I'm from New Mexico. I spent many years in California. Now I've been back, and I'm between New Mexico and Colorado now. And the more time I spend here, the more I realize, or the more time I spend anywhere, the effects of climate change. I'm addressing it more consciously in my work as of late. The last piece that I did, actually from the Lortel Commission, the play Boy, deals very, very directly with the drought, with climate change here in the Southwest, where I have an actual cottonwood tree who is the same age as one of the neighborhood women, and they compare notes, the parallels between gentrification and the death of the bosque, the cottonwood forest, due to invasive species taking up more than their fair share of the water and crowding them out of the neighborhood. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. But of course, I could go on because this is such a deep and vast and important, vital topic to us. The climate change. We can't escape it.
Yes. Exal Iraheta.
Thank you, Monica, for that. I agree. I think that's the biggest and the most honest statement is we can't escape it, right? We are subordinate to the natural elements around us of this planet. And I think, my relationship to sort of climate change and how I try to engage with it is really focusing on our human relationships with nature. So looking at each other as siblings, looking at each other as genetic siblings, since we share so much, of our genomes with nature. And a lot of that work has taken me to really explore indigenous relationships with nature. One of my sort of anchor books that I've been going back to often recently is Fresh Banana Leaves by Jessica Hernandez. And a wonderful story about her father's relationship in El Salvador to nature. She tells us so much beautiful. Got a little bit. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure if I'm getting it. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, but she talks about this beautiful relationship she had that her father had with this banana tree in El Salvador during the Civil War, and how he grew up loving this banana tree, had this relationship with this banana tree, it was beautiful. And then one day, this banana tree ended up saving his life when a bomb was dropped overhead of where he lived. And that to me is sort of the anchor to a lot of what I think we need to remind ourselves, that we keep our, religion, everything tells us that we are owners of this planet, that that we look at this and this is our land. We pay fictional money and now they're just data codes to say this is our land, right? But ultimately it's not. We fight over as you know, each other over this. And it's to me, the source of a lot of evil on this planet is our lack of understanding of our relationship to this world and nature.
Well said. Yes, Iraisa, anything you wish to articulate?
Yeah, thank you both for those answers. It's I think more recently I've thought of climate change in my work and in things that I'm writing more explicitly. Earlier on, I think my relationship to climate change and how I was writing about it or addressing it had to do with my relationship to my survival. When I first started working as a playwright, I moved back to where I grew up, which is near Atlantic City, and Hurricane Sandy hit, and hurricanes, and the more and more that these natural disasters were happening, the more it affected my livelihood, the livelihood of the people surrounding me. Like, I'll never forget, I had this job and it ended early because nobody was coming, you know, to enjoy the ocean anymore because they thought it wasn't there. It was very odd. And, you know, like, and my relationship to the ocean is like, I relate a lot to what Exal was saying, because my relationship to that place is a spiritual one. But there's also this connection of it, of your livelihood being based off of tourism, and hand in hand, what has tourism done to accelerate the climate crisis. So it's all like this very complicated relationships that showed up in my writing, not necessarily as like climate change with capital C, but just in how can we survive. And more recently, I've been working with a collaborator who I've known for years and years and years, and his name's Devin Preston, and he comes to theater from a place of devising, and I come at it more as a writer and actor, and he's more of a deviser, and we've been working on a project together that addresses the journalism behind climate change, and the story that is told, and how is really like the science journalism and the story of climate change, and how to address like immediate crises that have happened as a result of climate change, and how it kind of gets politicized, and ultimately how stories get told and how they should be told in order to actually I mean survive, because like as I think we've all kind of touched on, it's a matter of our survival as a species. So yeah, those are kind of the things that I have been thinking in terms of climate change over the last, you know, well, Sandy was more than 10 years ago, but also more recently in terms of like the narrative constructed around climate change.
Yeah, thank you for all your responses. So beautiful. And I wanted to, it made me think about, I came across a item online, a verified one. I have to say that. We have to say that now. It was truly verified. It was not verified. A verified item online that talked about one of the first instances in, speaking of narrative and journalism, Iraisa, instances of a mention of climate change in the US was in 1958. So sometimes we think about it as being something that people started talking about in the 70s, but it was sort of eye-opening to me to go like, oh wow, like even further back they knew, and still we've done nothing. So it just shows you again, you know, rapaciousness, greed, manufacturing consent, all these things that have sort of contributed to the escalating crisis that we're in, which I think is also being treated somewhat. I asked this question, you know, to start the series, one, because it's a passion of mine, two, because one of the themes that we have at the Alcove is writing that's devoted to the climate crisis and to kind of expressing, articulating the times we're in, mainly as a reaction against the fact that there are also, I will not name names, but there's a lot of theater that actually doesn't even mention that we're in a climate crisis, that doesn't even have that as a backdrop, that are so-called realism, but I don't know what that means if it's not reflecting the world, right? So I feel like one of the things that we have as playwrights, one of the brilliant things that we can do as architects of a theater experience is to kind of say, hey, look over here, people. Right? We can point at things, we can lift things up that are being ignored. Again, for many of the same reasons that we articulated earlier, capitalism. So I think that, you know, one of the things I wanted to weave into this is, of course, you're all distinctive artists, and come at your work differently. And I wanted to look at maybe themes and concerns that sort of animate your work, maybe over your body of work or your emerging body of work, or maybe you don't notice those. You know, I know some writers are like, I don't know what I write, I just write stuff. But I think that if you've written more than a few plays, you start to see patterns emerging. I mean, how could you not, right? So I just wonder what themes you gravitate toward, but also ones that you see emerge from your work, maybe ones that you're unconscious of. And again, we can go in any order, but and leave it to you.
I don't mind answering that one first this time. Yeah, I've actually, it's funny that you asked this question, because of this last couple of months has been a pause for me, and a really kind of reset of really looking back as to what is it that I am trying to say, how am I saying it, why am I saying it, sort of situation. I think when I started writing, a lot of it was exploring my relationship to my mother. You know, the idea of what is a child to a parent, what is a parent's responsibility to a child, who sets those expectations, where does that come from, and in a weird way, that's kind of how I started expanding this idea of mother and child. And the way that I see living animals is we are all children of Mother Nature, and then I started asking the same questions that I was asking. What is my responsibility to my Mother Nature? What is my relationship? Who sets these expectations? Is there communication coming from the other side that we're not paying attention to, right? And how do we communicate across species when we don't have language? Is a lot of these things that come to mind when I'm kind of digging these things. Now, these are big questions. I don't think I'm ever going to arrive to like a simple answer, which is kind of the point, right? But yeah, I think that's led me a lot to expand my concept of what identity is as an individual versus identity as a species. And those themes just keep coming back. They, no matter how much you want to, save your shore from waves, they'll crash upon them anyways, right? So you kind of have to listen to what's just naturally coming in. And I think that's really sort of where I'm at now, and expanding that from there. Yeah, I love that question.
Oh, yeah, Mónica, Iraisa, you wish to address themes and concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I was told that I'm always writing about mourning, which is funny because, and then I look back at all my plays and I was like, they are sort of all about mourning. It's even in the title of one of my plays. But I think a lot of my plays do address mourning, even in comedies. I look back at something that I thought was just a straight comedy about good intentions gone wrong, and it was also about a breakup, so that in a way was about mourning. So I do think that is a theme that comes up a lot in my work. I'm sort of first gen adjacent, because I am the first generation born in this country, but my mom was 4 when she came here. So I think I grew up bilingual, and a lot of my plays are bilingual, and a lot of what I write about is the fear of assimilation, I think. What happens once we start to lose languages or take on certain traditions that are not from our culture, or let go of traditions of our culture. And I think I write about caretakers a lot. I think I have a love of eldest daughters, and the responsibility that often falls on eldest daughters a lot. That's a generalization, but that's usually the characters in my play. And spirituality and what that means. What is our relationship to God, whatever that means to you, and and a higher power and ancestors.
Oh, Mónica.
I think looking back at the plays that I've written, they're all marked by a couple of things. I think some of them, one is a theme that revolves around social justice in some way. But also, there's also another component, which is the form, which is I love language, and I'm not a great fan of realism. I think film and television and life do that better. So I really appreciate and write through a more mythic, poetic form as far as language and style goes. I also think, one of my great theatrical heroes, Cantor, talks about cultivating a relationship with the dead and how do we connect to the dead. And I think that that's also a thread going through all of my plays, whether it's about death, whether they're characters that have transitioned, sometimes having both. Sometimes, in our Latino non-binary of time reality, maybe they're not ghosts. And I'm also just lately thinking, and this kind of goes back to the climate change question, in terms of our relationship of the dead, not the dead from the past, but the dead to the future. And I think those are some of the things that I'm working with, and also very much just going back to the language. And I mean, I'm a shameless punster, and I love wordplay, and I'm not ashamed of it because I see it very, very concretely couched in a cultural identity where we come from a place of colonial languages, Spanish and English, and a place, in the Southwest where we did not enjoy a lot of economic prosperity, but guess what's free? Words and language. And we always have that and have those at our disposal for our great entertainment.
Yeah, so cool, right? Words are at our disposal. It's a kind of, I always talk about writing as a kind of, if we can put ourselves in that headspace, I think it's the challenge of writing, looking at it from the outside when people are trying to ban books and, that kind of environment has more to do with it. I think that the people that are thinking those things, some of it is craven and wrongheaded. Some of it is around, I see this line in the book, it must be bad, right? They're kind of pointing at stuff in a very literal way. But I think that underneath it is that, weirdly, I think it's reactionary understanding that that writing is a very free space, right? That you can actually chase your imagination wherever it leads. And sometimes it leads to very dark places, and sometimes it leads to very bright places, and all the spaces in between. And I think people are terrified, terrified of that kind of freedom. Right, the freedom that the page allows, and also the freedom that you allow yourself, right? So I think that thinking about who's been allowed to be in print and who hasn't, when were women allowed? When were women, just to speak, when are women and non-binary people allowed to kind of have the work in print and widely disseminated, right? And so there's a kind of there's a question of permission, I think, is inside of the writing process. What do you allow yourself to do? And a lot of this has to do with, expectations from the industry, which are not you, but you're tethered to, and you're kind of responding to in some way. How can you not, right? And another side of it is you're wrestling your own demons. And also maybe looking for your own angels when you write. And so I just wanted to tease out the question inside of this, which has to do with the industry, because we have to deal with it. And so, I mean, it's just like the practical side of being a playwright, right, is that you have to deal with the industry. And where you kind of situate your work or thinking about the work when you're in dialogue with the industry, but also what do you think, I'll make no assumptions, but what do you think is being expected of you? And also, how do you challenge those expectations? Whoever wishes to begin.
Honestly, I don't have a lot to say about this, sadly, because most of my career I was working as an actor. I also direct. I'm also an educator. Although I've always written, I came to the formality of playwriting a little bit late in the game. So I might be what we consider, an emerging playwright. And one thing that I see happen is that playwriting is a long game. The people that I see that have my contemporaries that are having productions, that are having success, they've been jamming at this rigorously for decades. And I can say, I went back to school in my mid-50s. I did my MFA, graduated in 2018 in dramatic writing. So in that way, I'm a bit late to the game, and I don't really have a relationship with the industry. I've never had a production. And I'm looking at this point, I think I'm gonna have to start a company. I'm gonna just have to start self-producing probably here based in New Mexico. So I'll leave it at that. I don't have a lot to contribute to that very salient question.
No, no worries at all.
Monica, I got to say, I appreciate you sharing that though, because that is exactly, I think that I don't think that it really, I don't want this to come off wrong, but I don't think it matters when you start the game, right? I feel like that feeling is always going to be there because I'm sort of entering my first foray into education as well. I've been starting to teach a couple of years now at Northwestern, and
Yes,
it's very interesting to see the dynamics of students at the young age putting the career before the art, and asking those questions of how can I break in rather than who am I at a young age. And I think that that's what you said, Monica, right there is a big indication of where our industry is right now. This idea that there is something to break into. When in reality, and this is something that I've been reminding myself, and it helps telling younger people, so please tell me anytime you want, that the craft can exist outside of the industry. The writing, we were writing and sharing stories before industry came along and commodified it, right? And before capitalism came in and said, hey, this is how you're going to produce. This is the only way you can produce. And this is what success equals if you produce. So I'm kind of in that game too. I'm like, I just got my first, production at Royal Kid a couple years ago, and it was unexpected. And then it was, to me, it felt quick. But, from the outside, of course, it doesn't look like that. But I think that there's, especially being in Chicago now and being in in the community for a minute, I feel like that there's levels of the industry that we don't talk about. There's the higher level people, right? The big companies, the ones that those who are non-theater goers know about. And then there's like the community storefronts, the ones who are really like on the ground doing that hard work of impacting the closest around them. And I think it's worth really defining what industry means to us as theater makers and artists, and what part of the industry do we want to enhance. And, because we tend to make it all monolith as well, and it's not. And that's where I'm at with that. I think it's me trying to figure out and asking these questions, right? Like what other artists are you looking at as well? What am I the only Latin artist that you're thinking about? That's a question I've learned to ask, because if I am, then I feel, like tokenized, right? And I don't want to feel like that. So if you're considering others, that's great. It makes me feel a little bit more like you are exploring. But yeah, I think I'm at the very beginnings of asking the same questions and figuring out, stumbling.
Yeah, I relate to a lot of what both of you are saying. Both as an educator, as a theater maker, writer, and yeah, I mean, Monica, like to your point, Monica, the things that I'm thinking about is the first play I ever wrote, I ended up self-producing, because I got tired of hearing that it was impossible to produce. So I did it, and it was exhausting, and realized like it would be really hard to do that. And this was almost 10 years ago at this point. So and I think a lot of what's tied into this conversation has to do with resources and who holds those resources. So I, in that instance, I was working full time and producing at night, working full time in something that had nothing to do with theater, producing at night, directing the show, doing, jumping in when someone wouldn't show up to rehearsal. And then I did that, and then more opportunities came, because the thing that so many people had told me was impossible to do, some of them came to the show and were like, oh, that's totally possible to do. So it was like a matter of showing this can happen. This is, it takes place in the middle of the ocean, but there are creative ways of doing that. Yeah, and it's always hard to like figure out. Sometimes it's hard to figure out where you are in the industry because of like how whatever the industry defines your work and the difference between how your work is defined and how you define it. So it's always kind of hard to find that place. I had one production right before COVID, and again, that was with a company that I was helping to found, and then they ended up producing one in my place. But that's, yeah, it's, and ever since then, it's been like developing a lot of things, and I appreciate this like candid conversation of just continuing to develop and hoping and forging relationships with folks who have resources, who you have some trust in, and who you see whose work they create. To your point, Exal, of like this, like, who else are you interested in? Who else are you producing? And wanting to continue to foster those relationships, while also, for me, it's also like, how am I creating opportunities for other artists with the work that I do? And I've been thinking a lot recently of self-producing again, and trying to create things that, like, for me, are more manageable and more realistic than my first very ambitious self-production. That won't leave me, won't make me wait 10 years to think about doing it again. But yeah, I've thought a lot about, like, what is the industry that exists, who holds the resources, and why are certain places, I guess, in some sort of hierarchy, because it is a very hierarchical system. And to your point of the younger artists, of like, sometimes I am concerned, and do try to say to my students and say to myself of, like, not necessarily what theater do you want this produced at, but who do you want in the audience? I think that's, the industry doesn't always foster the audience that could come or that would be interested in my work. So it becomes about me, the artist, fostering that audience and inviting that audience in, and creating work that will invite that audience in. And it's a constant, for me, I feel like it's this constant, like, switching your brain in, okay, I want to eat and survive, and also, like, who was I writing for in the first place? Yeah.
Well, it can be pretty daunting. It can be very daunting because there are so many examples of so many writing development incubators and labs that have closed. We look at what's happening in the regional theater scene. We look at the opportunities to develop work have dwindled, especially since after COVID. And then on the other hand, we see there's other things that give me a little bit of hope. Like, I'm looking toward Jacob Padron's model of Long Wharf, where they've done away with the overhead of an actual facility that has become more a migrant theater. So that gives me another idea of how I might approach things. I think also in terms of climate crisis, I mean, every time I've done theater, it's always been climate friendly, because it comes from this aesthetic of poor theater. We don't have resources, so it's always taking things and reinventing them into something else. It's been 10 years that since I left Los Angeles, and being in New Mexico, there's one equity house here, and the capacity is like 60 seats. So I think the contract is, I don't know what it is. I'm guessing it's like $200 a week. So I'm in a spot where I'm kind of out of sight, out of mind from any of the great urban centers. So it does create that mandate. Okay, how am I gonna I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but I think I can take the axle from Exal.
That's so cool. Maybe this is a good way to move into the question about dreaming, because I feel we're almost at that space to talk about, like, what are you dreaming about? How does dreaming itself influence your writing process, if it does? I know some people are very, like, I write down all my dreams, and then I, think about them, and then maybe they manifest in my plays. Some people actually try to dream plays into existence. I think that's a way of writing where you kind of just, it just sort of takes over you, and then suddenly it's on the page and you're just chasing it and following it. But it's also about, like, what dreams do you highlight for yourself, and what dream spaces do you protect for yourself as a writer? Because I think one of the things that happens in our industry in all its many different forms is that, and varieties, is that it cuts at our dream space. it starts to kind of steal from that space because, we're having to produce, we're having to we're having to tell people about the play, like literally just telling people about something exists, right? It takes time and energy, right? It takes time and energy away from something that's more private and more, more, again, I'm going to use the word mysterious, a place that's sort of undefined and more of the access to the unconscious, if you would. So I just wonder how dreaming sort of factors in your work, but also if you use it at all, like on a material level.
I love this question because so many of my plays have dreams in them. And I think, and I've had this discussion like culturally, I think, especially for me as a Latina, like dreams and reality can be one and the same. I think I love that in Spanish you say you dream with somebody, not of somebody. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think for me, dreams are such a big part of my writing, and sometimes I approach this question in terms of like dreams to me are reality. To me, dreams are synonymous with hope. Like we can have hope in not thinking, if you just stop and don't think about the industry things and just like dream and hope and tell stories from a place of hope, which I know can be complicated, as hope is a complicated word for some, but it's something that I try to hold on to and try to keep in stories that I tell. And I think the way for me is if you think of dreams in terms of process and in terms of not, being tied so much to like the industry things and thinking so much about process and the writing of process, right now I'm in a process. I was like, okay, I just got to sit down and write this play because I have a deadline and I've procrastinated with research to the last point. And I just came back to like, okay, be okay with writing the bad version and also just be like handwrite it. I always start with handwriting, and that to me keeps it in a very like intuitive, visceral space.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a little bit to kind of tie into also like the last question for me. I feel like dreaming, my personal sort of dreams, and I agree. You said this, it's like this sort of synonymous to hope, right? That to me, it's like I haven't been able to hope until I was like financially secure, that I wasn't struggling, right? And it's been a long journey to get to a point where I was like, well, now I can dream. But looking back, what kept me going through that time of struggle was this little seed of a dream that I was hoping to achieve and still hope to achieve in terms of, a goal set. But I think I've also started thinking a lot about how we consider dreams for ourselves in a way that it's not like a concrete idea of this is exactly what it needs to be in order for it to be a successful dream, and more of like, what is that dream? What is that feeling that I get from that dream, or that hope, or what is it? What is the environment that I'm hoping to get to one day? That this is either it's generative, it's because I'm collaborating, is it because I'm affecting an audience? Is it, what is it, that feeling? And trying to search for that feeling more than searching for the actual, oh, I got a Broadway show, that's my dream, like that's, to me, that feels a lot less achievable than I want a community that is being impacted by XYZ to really come up to me and say thank you. Like that is to me like a huge dream, right? And I also think that in terms of like craft and dream a little bit, I love thinking about how characters dream. I really imagine, what do they dream about? How do they dream? What dreams are important for them to communicate to other people? I always say that I don't write down a dream unless I'm like excited to tell my mom about it, right? So, because she'll like, it's prophetic, right? She'll find reasons why I'm having it. So and so appeared in the dream, so therefore they're saying this, and that means that this may happen. And I love that experience of like finding the meaning hidden behind the images that we remember, and that's what I try to communicate, I think, in writing too. It's this sort of the magical sense of, no, we're not going to ever like visually see this in our real life, but we'll have that feeling maybe.
That's where I live. in dreamland. And I feel like for me, it's also as an aesthetic, I kind of refer to things as dream space, a dream reality. I won't say I go as far as to reject, but I'm not a fan of the word magical realism. I think it has more to do with a dream reality that might be more closer aligned with our cultural aesthetic, maybe. The first memory I ever have about being alive was a dream. And I have pages and pages and pages of recorded dreams. I don't do that anymore because my sleep is too important to me and it's too problematic to actually wake up and write down the dreams. But I've kept dream journals. I've been a student of astrology since I was 6 years old. I often consult the tarot in my playwriting. I had a fantastic revelation with this last piece that I worked on for the Lortel Micro Commission, where I had some body work, and I was totally stuck with the play. And the body worker said, "I'm completely called to your right thigh. Can I touch it?" And he said, "It's screaming to me, mother." And 2 weeks later, it unlocked an incredible problem that I had with that play. So I'm very, I think it's no accident that our Fornesian prodigy Caridad asked a question like this. And I think from my interaction, long before I became disciplined as a playwright, I had the opportunity to work on many new works with Fornes's disciples, Octavio Solis, Luis Alfaro, and Garcia Romero, Vigdalia Cruz. And I think kind of through this osmosis, that's also become part of my practice. But I think that was also just part of my DNA.
Yeah, indeed, yes. Dreaming, central to so much. And I think that one of the things that it makes me think about is that it's also about treating time and space differently. Time and space is commodified in U.S. culture and a lot of Western culture, right? So we're working on what some people call linear time, which that's a concept that not everybody adheres to, and so I think that and I think it's tied to then, ironically, to how plays are structured, right? So I don't want to use as easy a binary as linear and nonlinear, but sometimes people use that binary in a kind of strange way, and they think of it as like, well, linear, which I do think is attached to capitalism, and I do think it's attached to commodification of time, and then nonlinear, why some people, why is this a nonlinear play, right? This is this sort of like, they scream at you. And I'm just like, that's not commodified time, right? That's a different kind of way of experiencing life. And it's another articulation of it. And maybe the sort of irritating reactions to something that's nonlinear, especially in theater, I think that's not as true in film, by the way, is related to how people have been hardwired to think of time as a commodity. Even people using words like time management, you know what I mean? You know where I'm getting at, right, with this. So I think that I just wonder about, I was thinking about, we're living in a time that's incredibly out of joint, to quote a famous person, and it's out of joint in several directions. One, in the relationship to the planet, where some people are literally promoting a kind of climate change isn't happening, again, for nefarious reasons, but they're doing this, right? So, and that creates an out of jointness, right? Because it's like, but it is. Well, how can you say that? Oh, well, what time are you in? You know what I mean? And so that creates this sort of, and so I think that as writers, I think one of the confounding things about this age era that we're in is that we're actually, there isn't a consensus around, literally around an understanding of time, and a consensus around the fact that time has been fractured multiply. And this goes, to I could go on for days about how, capitalism has sort of captured us and done all sorts of things to kind of make us be skeptical of things that aren't in that mode. But I wonder if any of this speaks to you, how to make stuff in a time that's out of joint, and how to articulate that out of jointness.
Well, that's the beauty of the stage, of the theater, and I don't think we utilize that enough. That's very, very often, because I do teach undergraduates, I teach at a private liberal arts school. So the majority of my students do not want to be playwrights. They're taking the course as part of a liberal arts curriculum. And one of the challenges that I have is, how do I teach playwriting to people who have really not seen a lot of theater? And the theater that they have seen has very much been, whatever the high school has produced, or the traveling road shows, which are all very conventional. So what I get a lot is a lot of like a facsimile of a sitcom, this kind of a thing. So we work a lot with dreams, with ways to circumvent linear thinking, to engender the imagination. And I think this is one of the most, when we can crack that nut, when we see that happen in the theater, it's one of the most vital, beautiful moments that we have. I mean, why do we want to go to the theater to see a facsimile of what I think I said earlier, what the television screen can do a lot better?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's, this is a big question too, in terms of the struggle between being taught to write versus just feeling the writing, right? Because I think the theory of writing can really prevent us from exploring, Monica, what you're saying, because I think, and I'm like, I'm getting away from this idea, the structure. How is it going to be consumed by the audience if they don't have this with them, right? That's obviously, it's not true, because time and dreams, and the way that they squish, extend, push time, I think that's some of the most beautiful things that you can explore. And the way that I love to do it is just kind of giving us moments where the character feels the time, whether it's a minute or 2 minutes, but they make a conscious decision of feeling that time. But I haven't thought about it, to be honest, as much as like breaking time and shrinking it or extending it. I think that's really an amazing concept I'm leaving with.
I think you probably do it unconsciously, just
probably.
How we can fit in, a millennium in an hour and a half, or
Exactly.
or 5 minutes. We can stretch it out. And my play Los Dreamers, which is about the dreamers, the DACA recipients, but it's also, if I have a stage direction that says the scenes should go from one scene to the other with the unapologetic fluidity of a dream.
Yes.
Because guess what? We can do that in theater.
Yeah.
You can. It's so interesting, because I think a lot of my students confounded by this idea, especially undergrads. They're kind of like, what do you mean you can just go there? And it's, yep, you can in theater. You do it differently than you do in film, but you can do it, and but wrapping the brain around that, oh my heavens, it takes it takes a lot. And usually what I do is I end up talking a lot about dance theater with my students. And then they sort of get it when they see dance theater, and they're like, oh, and they go, okay, now do that with words, right? Yes, Iraisa.
Yeah, I love that Anne Garcia Romero's name came up earlier, because she was one of my first playwriting professors, and like very much like my intro to playwriting was like, let's just let the character enter your mind, and time, time can be fluid, and that's what a play is. And we read plays that just like blew my mind of like, oh, this can be a play, like this is what happens in theater. This is the place where time can shift and doesn't necessarily matter. And then later I learned about structure. Or Western structure, I should say.
Right, exactly.
Right. I shouldn't say structure. I should say Western structure, which is I think, like you said, in TV and film, that structure works so much better than it does in theater. And I think one of the challenges I've had recently with time is in going back to this theme of mourning, of like writing about mourning. And my instinct was, it is not like the characters do not go on this fulfilled linear journey, because when you are mourning any human being, it is not a linear journey. So it became the challenge of in development processes was, how do we retain this feeling of this is not a linear experience, but still feel like, but the audience can still feel like they are following what these, you know, the characters' journey and story, and not feel like, oh, everything is tied, you know, it's not tied up in a neat bow, because that's not the way it works. And mourning is not linear. And I love playing with time in plays. It feels like it's the one place that's still sacred, that you can still break rules of time. And sometimes you get a lot of questions about it, and sometimes you don't. And that's the thing that's beautiful about it.
Cool. We're almost at time. But I'd love to kind of just put in the room maybe a whimsical question, and more to do with, is it whimsical? I hope it is. How are you finding your spaces of joyfulness during what is, let's face it, we're in a very bleak time in the world, right? So how are you finding those spaces for yourself? Because I think they are important in terms of being a creative artist, to hold on to some of that, but at the same time not ignore, right? You can't ignore like what's happening in the world. So yeah, joyfulness. Where does it sit for you? How do you hold on to it?
Oh man, I think it depends on the day, and the time and the moment. I think that there's conscious decisions of finding joy, which are saving time to do what I like to, when we say we do nothing, but really what we do is decompress our minds and thoughts and letting our mind roam free, right? I try to keep those precious moments before and after work. And then the unplanned, those moments of spontaneity that, oh my gosh, that car just drove by with that song that I love. Let me play that song because I want to hear it again, and allowing myself to just follow that as well. And just leaning in on the people and saying, hey, I'm having a hard time. Or, hey, are you doing anything next week that I'd love to go to the beach? Or just accept that I want to be alone and just tell everyone, I just want to be alone this week, Those things to me feel joyful. They might not be the most active things, but I think that joy doesn't have to be active all the time. And so I try to hold those moments for myself, for sure.
Yeah, I agree that sometimes joyfulness takes work, especially, in the last, it depends on who it is, personally, whatever it is, it's like the last 5 years of, COVID hitting and all those types of things. I think it for me personally, it became more of an active pursuit of joyfulness. In a weird way, I think because of that time that was so isolating, and because of any times in my life that have been isolating, anytime I am naturally an introverted person, and now anytime I am around people, I take so much joy in it, and appreciate that time that I spend with people so much more. And then similarly, it's all remind myself that I do love being alone sometimes. And I find joy in remind myself that being alone will bring me joy, and take it, whatever it is, moments of solitude that you can just kind of think, and all of that becomes a part of the stories that I tell. Yeah, I think I would second that joy is hard, but also I don't know, this morning, at least here in where I am, there was this beautiful breeze today, and I was oh, I love that having hot coffee when it's not
Nice.
super hot outside,
Yeah.
there's a breeze, and like you're enjoying coffee is like in the morning, and like to me, I would like that feeling brought me so much joy of like, oh, going back to climate change, like these days where you get a nice breeze,
Yeah.
like, you hold on to that. So yeah,
100%.
that's how I find it. Yeah.
You know, joy feels aspirational to me. Like you say, sometimes you have to work for it, or just be completely super sensitive and attuned, right? I'm finishing up a semester-long sabbatical, so it's been great to return. For the first time in 5 years, I've been able to read for pleasure. So I've actually been reading novels, which I hadn't done in years, and I'm reading one novel now that is giving me so much joy. I'm a little late to the Children of the Lost Archive, Valeria Luiselli, and I just have to stop and just gasp or breathe by some of the pages. I also enjoy. I spend a lot of time alone, and usually it's great for the most part, right? So I enjoy going out on my morning walks. I can walk away from my house yesterday morning and saw the peacocks along the ditch bank within half an hour of my house. I love to dance. I haven't danced in a long time. I had a hip replacement in March. So hopefully soon I'll be able to kind of get back on the salsa floor. That gives me a lot of joy. I love to sing, which I forget because I'm a terrible singer. So it has to happen like in the car or in the shower or that kind of thing. But I think yesterday I sang and I realized, wow, I haven't like vocalized in this way in a really long time. And it's, we know there's science around how beneficial it is. And I guess the most recently, it's been a week since I had the great luck to attend the La Mama Directors Symposium in Italy. And that was true joy because it was being in mode of creating.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, the place is stunning. We're cared for, we're fed incredibly. There's so many wonderful things, but the real joy came from those moments of collaboration and interchange and discovery. And I mean, that's my juice. And therein lies the rub, right? How do we create the opportunities for that to happen? I don't nearly get to have that connection as I would like to. So I'm going to, this will be my last year at the college. I've given my notice. I'm taking an early retirement, and in the hopes of pursuing more joy and happiness. In some ways, I mean, I will be also pursuing more poverty, but I realize I need to. I've been giving up too much. I haven't been able to find the balance between teaching and making. So.
Yeah.
And that's another way that it's aspirational. So stay tuned for the next adventures of Chicanas in Space.
Yes.
Oh my heavens! Yay! So awesome.
Yeah.
What a fun way. I love having on Chicanos in Space. That's fun.
Naomi Quinones, the beautiful Chicana playwright. That's hers. And
it's hers. You're quoting, which is still good. It's still awesome. Thank you so much for making time today and for being so generous and so warm and so just forthright about your responses. It's been very moving. For those of you that have followed the series, what I usually do is I say goodbye to you out there, but then after I hit end recording, I say with the artists and do another kind of little goodbye. So for now, if you don't know Conversations from the Alcove, please check it out. There's lots of wonderful conversations, and keep the faith in theater.